In the pre-dawn dark of September 12, 1918, the landscape around the French town of Saint-Mihiel was soaked in rain, mud, and silence. For weeks, the skies had been gray, the roads churned to mire, and the air thick with tension. The villages and fields of the Meuse region, once quiet and pastoral, had become a no-man's land, scarred by shell craters, barbed wire, and half-buried corpses. Years of warfare had turned northeastern France into a chessboard of trenches and artillery emplacements. And in this grim theater of World War I, a new actor was about to take center stage: the United States. After more than a year of preparation, the American Expeditionary Forces were ready to lead their first major offensive. For the first time, American troops would fight under American command, launching a full-scale operation against an entrenched German position. No longer just reinforcements for French and British lines, they were now expected to take and hold ground, and to prove that the United States was not only present in the war, but capable of changing its outcome. Their target was a bulge in the German line that had existed since 1914, the Saint-Mihiel salient. From the war's earliest days, the Germans had held the salient as a strategic wedge into French territory. The town of Saint-Mihiel, located southeast of Verdun, served as the anchor of their defenses, cutting through key rail lines and hampering Allied logistics. For 4 years, the Allies had tried to push them out, with little success. The Germans had turned the salient into a fortress, complete with multiple trench lines, concrete machine gun bunkers, and thick belts of wire. The ground around it was devastated by artillery, riddled with water-filled craters, and dotted with the remnants of previous failed offensives. Now in the final months of the war, it was time to strike again. But this time, the attack would be American-led. General John J. Pershing, commander of the AEF, had long resisted calls to integrate his troops fully into French and British units. He believed the U.S. Army should remain an independent fighting force, and that it needed to prove its capability on the battlefield. The Saint-Mihiel offensive was his opportunity to do exactly that. The planning began in earnest in August 1918. The first U.S. Army recently created would lead the attack. It was a massive force, over 550,000 men, including infantry, artillery, engineers, air units, and logistical support. French troops, including several veteran divisions, would assist on the flanks. Coordinated by Marshal Ferdinand Foch and overseen by General Pershing, the operation represented the largest concentration of American power in the war to date. The goal was to eliminate the salient by attacking its base from both north and south, thereby pinching off the German defenders and collapsing the wedge. It was a daring plan, and risky. The terrain was difficult. The weather was deteriorating. The Germans, though stretched thin elsewhere, still held strong defensive positions, and the American army, while large, was still untested in operations of this scale. Many of its officers were green. Its divisions were a mix of regular army, National Guard, and draftees. Some had never seen combat. Others had fought only in support roles. But they were ready. They had trained, dug in, waited. And on the night of September 11th, they began to move. In the hours leading up to the assault, American artillery opened up in a thunderous barrage. More than 3,000 guns, including French heavy batteries, unleashed high explosive and gas shells on German positions along a 40-mile front. The sky was illuminated by flashes of gunfire. The earth shook. Villages that had stood for centuries crumbled into smoking rubble. Barbed wire was torn apart. Roads became impassable. The Germans, many already preparing to withdraw, were caught in the chaos. At 5 a.m. on September 12th, the infantry advanced. In the north, the First Corps pushed south from the Verdun sector. In the south, Fourth Corps drove north from the Selle River. The two forces would converge near the town of Vigneulles-lès-Atonchâtel, cutting off the salient. American troops moved forward in thick mud and light rain, navigating shell-pocked fields and shattered forests. The going was slow in places, tanks bogged down, horses collapsed, and men slipped under the weight of their packs. But despite the terrain, the advance was shockingly swift. In the initial hours, entire German trench systems were overrun with little resistance. Machine gun nests fell. Dugouts were captured with stunned defenders still inside. Entire regiments surrendered. Many German units had already begun pulling back in anticipation of the attack, but the speed and violence of the American assault caught them before they could finish. By the end of the first day, American forces had pushed 5 miles into enemy territory. On the second day, they advanced again. By September 13th, the northern and southern American forces linked up near Vigneulles. The salient was sealed. Over the next several days, American and French troops consolidated their positions, cleared out remaining pockets of resistance, and pushed beyond the original German lines. Saint-Mihiel itself fell without heavy fighting. By September 16th, the entire operation was considered complete. The results were stunning. In 4 days, the Allies had captured more than 15,000 German soldiers and hundreds of artillery pieces. The salient, which had stood since 1914, was gone. American casualties were relatively light compared to the scale of the victory, though still measured in the thousands. Most estimates place total U.S. losses at over 7,000 men, including more than 1,400 dead. But for the first major American-led operation of the war, it was an overwhelming success. And it wasn't just the infantry that had proven its worth. American engineers had built more than 1,000 miles of roads and laid down miles of communication wire to support the advance. Supply trains moved food, ammunition, and fuel through rain and shell fire. Field hospitals treated the wounded with astonishing speed and coordination. And perhaps most impressively, the American Air Service had conducted the largest coordinated air operation of the war. Over 1,500 aircraft, taking part in bombing runs, reconnaissance, and dogfights. The victory at Saint-Mihiel was both tactical and symbolic. Tactically, it eliminated a persistent thorn in the Allied side and restored a vital section of French railway. Strategically, it demonstrated that the American army could carry out large-scale operations and hold its own alongside the seasoned forces of Europe. Symbolically, it changed everything. For the American public back home, the victory was a moment of pride and vindication. Newspapers printed bold headlines, families pored over casualty lists, and for soldiers still in training camps across the U.S., it was a rallying cry. The boys over there were winning. For the Allies, it was proof that the Americans were not just enthusiastic newcomers, but professionals, capable, reliable, deadly. For the Germans, it was a warning. If the United States could field this kind of force now, what would they be able to do in another year? Of course, the war wouldn't last another year. Barely a week after Saint-Mihiel, American forces began another, even larger operation, the Meuse-Argonne offensive. It would be longer, bloodier, more complicated. But it was Saint-Mihiel that gave Pershing the confidence and the credibility to attempt it. Saint-Mihiel had been the rehearsal, and the Americans had delivered. They did it in the mud, in the rain, in fields soaked with the blood of earlier failed offensives. They did it with green officers and raw troops, with borrowed tanks, with French maps, with uncertain supply lines and rain-choked roads, but they did it. They took a German fortress that had stood for 4 years and tore it apart in 4 days. They advanced through smoke and gas, artillery and fear. And in the end, they stood on ground no American army had ever taken before, ground once thought untouchable. At Saint-Mihiel, the world saw that the Americans were not just part of the war, they were helping end it. Thank you for listening to Last Post History. Subscribe for more true stories from the world at war.